Okay, let's continue. So, where are we?
Fixed na po. Fixed na po.
Okay, so yeah. Thank you. So, we are already done with the fixed manufacturing cost. So, amad to ha, i-wrap up ko la. And fixed manufacturing cost, these are cost, fixed manufacturing overhead cost. These are costs that are indirect, and then these are costs that are part of the indirect labor and then indirect materials, plus the costs that are incurred in the factory. So, pwede ang cost maging variable kung it is on an hourly basis or may dahiya certain factor nga gin ko consider, like on hourly basis ba iya, number of production, etc. It's part of variable. Pero kung fixed ito hiya, it is not based on any factors, but it is at a fixed amount per month. Like for example, ang salaryhan, supervisor natin kung monthly hiya, regardless of how many hours he has rendered his services, regardless of how many products were produced. So, amo lagapit niya sweldo. Okay. So we have here another concepts for this matter, because duha man hiya. Prime cost and then conversion cost. So prime cost, these are the sum of direct materials and direct labor. So ang ngatanan nga mga direct labor plus direct materials, part hiyahan prime cost, while conversion cost, sum hiya of direct labor and overhead cost. Magagamitan ni hiya pag mag-answer na kitahin mga problems. Okay. So we have here types of, overhead cost allocation system. So what is cost allocation? Ano nga ba siya? Kung hawinaray, amo an pagbarahin han mga gastos. Okay, ginbarahin hiya. In English, it is the process of assigning indirect costs to a cost object using an allocation base. The allocation base should be a driver why a cost has been incurred. Allocation bases are the cause why the costs are being allocated. Allocation bases, amo lait ang rason kung kay ano nagkamay da cost. So, amo ito nga dait pinaka ginagamit it pag-compute kon pera ang dapat ibutang nga di, pera ang dapat ibutang nga di. Okay. So, common allocation base are as follows. Sometimes it is based on machine hours used or direct labor hours used, kilowatt hours consumed, square footage occupied, and many other allocation bases. It depends on the type of material or it depends on the type of product that is being manufactured. So there are two ways to allocate overhead costs to a cost object. First is based on the actual cost system. Okay, when we say actual cost system, may tuhiyaan na consider la kung pera good ang nagasto. Like, di ba, kung maghihimo kitahin salad, tagpira ang ginamit, ang ginpalit nga 2 days nga fruit cocktail. Tagpira ang gingamit nga Nestle cream. Tagpira ang gingamit nga, ano pa ba, sunod hito. Ano ba sunod salad aside from that? Fruit cocktail, Nestle cream, condensed milk. Sometimes, kung gusto niyo, magbutang hin evap, kung tripla niyo. So, an actual nga iyo gingamit han pagpalit hito, amo an upod han actual cost system. Kung pera good, an kamatuoran. Okay? So, whereas actual overhead incurred are accumulated separately in an overhead control account. So, we have what we call the overhead control account, where we are recording nga tanan nga overhead cost nga na incur. like an ilaw, like an ano pa ba, indirect material, indirect labor, which is part of overhead. It is part of the overhead control account. Then at the end of the period or upon completion of the production, it will be further assigned to work in process inventory. Okay. Kung maarang nakita kumpira an actual cost system based on the word itself, actual, pera an tuod nga nagastos. So, amo ito ya. Next is a normal cost system. It is the combination of actual direct material, actual direct labor, and predetermined overhead and assigned them to work in process inventory. Ang pagkakaibala nira is on the overhead. Parehas man nira actual direct labor, actual direct material. Ang pagkakaibala nira was on the work in process because they have based on the overhead. Ngayon. Because they have what we call the predetermined overhead. So, ano nga ba ito nga predetermined overhead? Okay, let's talk about it. May kita tinatawag nga predetermined overhead rate in computing for the predetermined overhead. So, adiha, to compute the predetermined overhead, total budget overhead costs is divided by its related activity level known as the activity base. The activity base should be a cost driver that directly costs the overhead to be incurred. Excuse me. Okay. So, budgeted overhead cost, it could either be mayakan it problem. We are expecting that on the next few years, we will be spending about 200,000 of overhead. Amot aton ibabot nga da. Activity-based naman, mayakan nga, and 20,000 hours in operation. So 20,000 hours will be the activity-based. Amo na it aton pag-compute predetermined overhead rate. Once the predetermined overhead rate has been calculated, the amount of overhead that will be assigned to work in process inventory is the applied overhead. So kung i-multiply na naton nito hiyahan actual hours nga aton na consume during the current year based hading overhead rate naton nga gin-compute, then magkakamay da kita applied overhead. Okay, adiha applied overhead, predetermined overhead rate multiplied by the actual activity volume. Kung di ba, based on 20,000 hours, pero ang nakonsumla talaga yan ang tuig was 19,000 hours. Ang ato na-compute din hinga rate, like for example, singa natin kanina ha, budgeted overhead. Singa natin 1 million. 1 million divided by 20,000 hours or machine hours. So, magiging 50 ang iya predetermined overhead rate. Pero ang iya lang ay ang na-consume nga hours was 19,000. Ang 50 nga predetermined overhead rate multiplied naton in 19,000 and 950,000 will be our applied overhead. Again ha, nag-assume kita haigbaw nga ang aton budgeted overhead cost the following year will be 1 million. So nag-assume kita nga 1 million nga diha igbaw. Nag-assume kita nga possible 20,000 it na po-produce, it mako-consume naton nga oras. So 1 million divided by 20,000, 1 million divide 20,000, 50. So meaning 50 per hour. So on 50 per hour, since we are looking for the applied overhead, multiplied naton by the number of hours that was actually used during that year. So 50 times 19,000, we have 950,000 applied overhead for that year. So may ito hiyat pag-compute if we are using the normal cost system. Okay. May dapay ito hiya other concept. Okay. Net applied overhead, di ba? So, we also have the actual overhead. We also have the actual overhead nga concept. So these are the costs that are actually incurred or are actually part of the overhead. So ang tuod nga nagastos kon pera talaga. Tapos ginbibiling naton nga da kung ang aton ba na record was more than the actual overhead or less than the actual overhead. Okay. It is important to note that both the actual overhead and the applied overhead are being recorded. Debits to the overhead control account represents the actual overhead incurred, whereas credit represents the applied overhead. There are three instances when applied overhead can be applied. First is when goods are transferred out to work in process inventory. Second, at the end of a period when financial statements are to be prepared. Lastly, it can be applied continuously as production take place. At the end of a period, total actual overhead is different from applied overhead. Such difference is called under-applied or over-applied. Amo na ito anak na mention kanina. So under-applied ito pag an actual overhead is more than the overhead applied. Syempre, nag-record kita applied overhead, pero ang kamatuoran talaga mas dako, syempre, it is an under-application. Whereas on the other hand, over-applied overhead occurs when actual overhead cost is less than the overhead applied to work in process inventory. Okay. Nasobrahan na naton pagbutang nasobrahan na naton pagbutanghan overhead naton and applied naton nga inventory based on the predetermined overhead rate as compared to the actual nga overhead. So it is an over application. Cost differences and differences on utilization of capacity cost the overhead to under-apply or over-apply. Okay, without ED. Okay, so may dapay ni additional concept. Overhead accounts are temporary or nominal accounts, of course. So these are being closed. So it depends sa kung ngayon niyagin ko close. Basahon natin kung ngayon niyagin ko close. In this manner, closing under and over applied inventory depends on materiality of amount involved. It depends on the materiality. So ha problem, dana ito nayakan kon material bahiya, dana liwat diri. So it bubuhaton kung diri magyakan kon material ban amount or diri kukumpyuto na lang niyo kung anon ginsunod. Okay. If the amount kuno is immaterial, diretso hiya close to cost of goods sold. Mas madali inihiya. Kay an aton over or under application, diretso close to cost of goods sold. Adiha, when overhead is under-applied, it is to be concluded that the over-applied is not enough and the closing process causes cost of goods sold to increase. Siyempre, pag under-applied ang aton cost of goods, ang aton overhead, dudugtungan naton para di rin na yung maging under-applied. So, ang aton under-application, again, close naton to cost of goods sold. So, definitely, ma-debit kitahin cost of goods sold. Okay. Whereas, kung it is an over-application, syempre, credit to cost of goods sold. Okay. Thus, the closing inventory adto ang debit pag under-applied, pag credit kung over-applied. Pero it aton kapartnerhan cost of goods sold account is the overhead account. So, kung mag-debit kita cost of goods sold, mag-credit kitahin overhead account. Adaha, kindly take note of this part here. Adaha, ada debit to cost of goods sold, debit to overhead and credit to cost of goods sold are necessary in closing the entries kapag it is an excessive overhead or an over-application. Pero if the amount is material, It is prorated among the work in process inventory, finished goods inventory, and cost of goods sold. So, ginre-ratio pa ito, yeah. How to do that? Computon niyo kung peraan work in process inventory nga ending, peraan finished goods inventory, nga peraan cost of goods sold. Tapos, i-total niyo. I-ratio niyo kung peraan work in process divided by han total, peraan finished goods divided by han total, peraan cost of goods sold divided by han total. Multiply niyo han amount nga over under application. Later, mababaroan ito naton kung mag-solve na kitahin problems. What time is it na ba ngayon, class? It's 8 o'clock. Okay. So here, ano ba nga process it iyayin mo on? Okay, actual cost system. Okay, let me read the problem. On January 1, 20XX, inventory balances of ABC Manufacturing Company are as follows. Direct material inventory, 175,000. Work in process inventory, 245,000. Finished goods inventory, 177,800. During the month, the company purchased direct materials amounting to 370,000. The warehouse manager then transferred 378,000 worth of direct materials to production department. Direct materials 370,000. The warehouse manager then transferred 378,000 worth of direct materials to production department. Wages for hourly paid factory workers totaled 633,000, of which 523,000 is attributable to direct labor. Pag magyakan nga direct labor, an excess niya will be part of the overhead na. Okay. In addition, 20,300 has been accrued to production supervisor. Utility costs are also incurred but are not yet paid at the end of January. Utility expenses are totaled 27,500, of which 23,300 are variable. Of course, the excess will be part of the overhead fixed cost or fixed overhead costs. Okay. Also, indirect materials amounting to 4,450 were also transferred to production area. The company also paid factory property taxes, 9,000, and factory insurance expense, 5,000. Okay, ano nga ba iniya? Factory property taxes. These are part of fixed overhead costs. Factory insurance expense, part of fixed overhead cost. It's because diri hiya dependent on the number of production, on the number of hours incurred or number of hours used in the production. So these are fixed overhead costs. Same with the depreciation of factory building for month ending January, which is 13,000. Okay. During the month, 1,190,500 of goods were completed and transferred to finished goods inventory. Lastly, goods costing 961,280 has been sold on account for 2,441,920. Halaba na yung problema no class, damo na nga costs. So, okay. Let's start to answer it using the actual cost system. Ang journal entry pa lang ay anat yagin papakiana. Ano? Okay, sige. Actual cost system, of course. 370,000 nga materials, 370,000 amay niya. So I think kaya na ito niyo. Kindly look at the journal entry nala ha. Pag-record man la itohan direct materials, direct labor, overhead, additional work in process nga 378 and gin-transfer ito hiya nga material. Okay, let me check. Yeah. Direct material nga gin-transfer. So, nga tanan nga mga aada work in process nga ginta-transfer nga direct material, like for example this one ha, ginki-credit na ang direct material to cancel it out because nabalhin naman hiya to work in process. So debit, work in process, credit, direct material. Ari naman, work in process inventory to record the salaries payable and 523,000 hay nito hiya nga 523,000. Adi class ha, attributable to direct labor 523,000. Kita unta kung anong account ang ginagamit. Work in process inventory. Adi ha, may separate account kapag overhead net ginagamit ha. Adihin variable overhead control. May kita fixed overhead control. Nga dihaan may excess kita on naton. And 523 accrued to production supervisor. Ini nga 20,300 hay na iton mga direct by nihiya or diri. These are part of indirect cost. Ano ba niya? Fixed or variable. So ayun. Adi. Nagyakan na hiya nga variable. So let's check. 2,300 plus 27,500 plus 23,300, 71,100. Ano pa ba mga variable costs? Indirect material, part lagya hit, indirect hit kanan, variable manufacturing overhead cost. Pero ba ang total nga di? Variable overhead cost, 110,000. Ngayon ito nakuha nga 110,000. Check natin ha. Accrued to production supervisor, opo diya. Of which direct labor. 633 minus 523, 110. Adi ha, 110 an excess inihiya. 633 nga total nga hourly nga rate for factory workers, 523 la kunuan attributable to direct labor. So 633 minus 523 amo naan variable overhead control. Nga dala ito nga transaction ha, salaries for direct and indirect labor. Natula ito nga transaction. Okay. Fixed overhead control. Adi ha, gin-consider ni Ranganhi nga an salary kunuhan production supervisor is a fixed cost. So, there are times nga diri hiya fixed pero mostly kapag magyakan nga salaries, it is on a monthly basis. Pero magyakan nga wage, it is a variable cost. So, usually ha, amot aton palatandaan. Okay, 20,300 baseline tohan sweldohan supervisor. Adi ha, it's fixed because it is termed as salary. Okay, production supervisor. Usually kasi kapag may mga supervisor na, they are paid on a monthly basis ang mga fixed overhead cost hiya. 23,300 accrued mixed utility costs. Kitaon ta kon anon iya fixed portion. Ano ba niya kan? Utility expense totaled 23,300 are variable. So meaning 7,500 ang total, 23,300 ang variable, remaining is a fixed overhead cost. 27,500 minus 23,300, 4,200 is a fixed cost. Fixed overhead cost. Adi, 4,200. But the utilities payable is equal to 27,500. So, gan separate niran pag-record han variable overhead control and then the fixed overhead control. Okay. So, parehas la ito class, i-green record la ito nira kon piraan variable overhead, based on indirect materials, tapos fixed overhead control, record the payment of property taxes. So, ayun. Parehas la ito nira class. Yeah, fixed cost and aton depreciation because it doesn't depend on how much product they are manufacturing or how many hours were used. So here, this is to record to account for the assignment of actual overhead cost to work in process. Okay. Work in process inventory, variable overhead control, fixed overhead control. Kindly take note of this one nala. Makikita man ito ni Yuan computation adi man hababa. 110 plus yan. Inbalhin laan mga variable ngayon fixed overhead control to the work in process account. Ang mga gin-debit hiya, gin-credit nga tanan nga na-record nga overhead controls. Daw napansin niyo gin-pan-credit hiya, so na-close na hiya, nabalhin na hiya to work in process account. That's why work in process account is debited. So napapansin niyo, nare-recall niyo, adi work in process, adi nan aton direct labor ngin overhead. So adi nga overhead, unfixed nga hin unvariable, gin-credit na hiya, amo nga naibutang na hiya to debit to work in process. That's why adi ha left side nan. Kay work in process debit from the overhead costs. Yan. Finished goods inventory, kapag ginbalhin na hiya to the finished goods. So ang work in process na is credited, ayan. None. Ginbalhin na hiya. And then finished goods inventory is debited. Amo nga nadugnan. Yan hi. Amay niya nga portion. Cost of goods manufactured. Nadugnan. Okay. Accounts receivable, syempre pag nagbaligyan na kita and all, maram naman kamay ni. Cost of goods sold and finished goods inventory. If they are using perpetual inventory system. So amo talaga ni entry. Cost of goods sold, debit, finished goods inventory, credit. Okay. May time pa. May time pa gadada. Adyo labay niya. Papio la inikitahan normal cost system. Okay. Using the same details of the above illustrative problem and the additional data presented below, shown in the table are the journal entries to be used to present the accounting under normal cost system. Variable overhead, fixed overhead. Budgeted overhead costs. Pera ko no, yan hi, given na 215,000. Sa pala na kon kanina nga 1 million, yan hi 215,000 ani ra gin ba-budget. And then the budgeted machine hours 25,000. Kin divide dia, nagkamay din nakitain predetermined overhead rate of 8.6 machine per hour. Per machine hour. Okay. Kanan variable adto ya. Fixed naman nga portion 645,750 divided by the budgeted machine hours, which is 63,000 machine hours. So we got 10.25 per machine hour. Okay. Applied overhead is equal to predetermined overhead rate multiplied by the actual activity volume. Pera ang actual, pera. 5,700 daw for variable. 5,700 din kapag sa fixed overhead. Okay. So, gin-multiply na ini class nga predetermined overhead rate to the actual number of machine hours. Yan. 8.6 multiplied by 5,700, amo na itatan variable overhead costs. And then 10.25 from our previous computation, which is 10.25 per machine hour multiplied by the number of machine hours, which is 5,700. So we got 58,425 pesos. Okay. So, tika nga da, or from there, do you have any questions or clarifications? Class, may pakiana? Okay? May pakiana, waray? Oh, waray. Sige. Medyo choppy. Sige.
Ma'am, na-record din
Okay.
nag-upload.
Isasend,
Ma'am, i-upload po din.
ig-upload ko ini nga to ha. YouTube nga how. Isend ko na laan link after.
Sige, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Sige. Welcome. Okay. So, amo na to class ha. And step is to compute for the predetermined overhead rate based on budgeted cost and then budgeted activity base. And then multiply the predetermined overhead rate by the actual hours used. So here, 5,700 to get the variable overhead applied. Tawagin ni Haira ha, variable overhead applied, fixed overhead applied. Okay. So, ayun. Same lang itong ato igbaw. And 1 to 9. Work in process inventory. This is based on our computation. Debit, credit to variable overhead applied. Yun. Basta same entry lang siya. If under or over applied is immaterial, i-close naton to cost of goods sold. To close under applied variable overhead, how much is the actual cost? May the actual cost ba nga hingagin mention? Ay, ato igbaw ano. Kitaon natin ha kung kay ano yan naging under applied. To close over applied variable overhead. So, pera ba ang variable overhead? 49,020. 49,020 ha. 49,020. Compare naton ang variable overhead control. 137, 750 minus variable overhead. 49, ba ito? 49. May ni nga under application or under applied nga 88,730. Kaya ang actual nga variable overhead cost was 137,750 based on era actual nga ginbaydan talaga. Era ha, 137,750 ang era actual nga ginbaydan pero ang era la na record under normal cost system was 49,020. So 137 nga actual minus 49,020 may dehera under applied nga 88,730. That's why igin-close siya to cost of goods sold. Kay kulang man ang era na record nga variable overhead cost, gin-debit ang cost of goods sold to add to the cost of goods sold. And then credit to variable overhead control account. Yan. Because it is under applied. Check naton ha kung ang fixed overhead applied is under or over. Fixed overhead, kitaon naton nga di kung pera ang era fixed overhead cost. Okay, let me check. Yadi ha, adi. Amoy niyan actual ha, kay actual costing man adin gingamit. 51,500 kono ang actual nga nagastos for fixed overhead control. I-compare naton to the predetermined overhead costing. Fixed overhead 58. So 51 kanina, 51,500 ang actual, 58,425 and anaton based on predetermined rate. So it is over applied by 6,925. Amo nga igin credit naton ang cost of goods sold, it's because we need to subtract from the cost of goods sold account because we have already recorded more than what should be the cost, the actual cost, more than the actual cost. So that's why we need to subtract. That's why nga gin credit ya because cost of goods sold is an expense. Expense is an asset. Expense is has a normal balance of debit, same with the asset, di ba? Pero yan, expense man gud dia, which it has a normal balance of debit. That's why kung i-credit naton hiya, it means deduction. So gindeduct naton hiya from the cost of goods sold account para mag-equal hiya to the actual cost of 51,500 and then 137,750 for variable overhead control. Okay. What else? Adi nga di class ang computation nira ha. You can just look at your material kung paano nasugad. Adi liwatin another method if diha, ang kanina ha, immaterial adto kanina, diretso cost of goods sold. Pag material naman hiya, then what you're going to do is to allocate it based on the ratio for work in process, finished goods, and cost of goods sold. Ko-compute mo lahira, adi nga mga ratio was computed based on dividing adi each by the total. So gin-compute la, pera ang work in process ending balance. 1,335,000. Makikita ito niyo nga di class ang computation ha. 1,335,250 divided by the total of the three, which is 3,664,830, ang mga nakuha ang 36.43%. So, igina-allocate lahiya, ang nga tanan nga over ngayon under using these percentages. So, ayan. So, nga di, because this is an over application, may ibanan hin 29,801 over applied overhead. Yan, over applied overhead ba siya? 81,801. Ano ba yung 81? 81,805. Is this a different, get this ang above? Bakit 81,805? Actual, ang sum na nila, okay, ang sum na nila gin equal na lahera to. Adiha, 88,730 minus 6,925, 81,805. Adiha, gin tig-ob nila. So, 81,805 is the under application, net under application. Bakit over application yung nakalagay dito? Under application siya eh. Actual overhead, applied overhead. It is an under application. Ayan, under application. Yan. Okay. So, it's a debit because it's an under application. So, dudug nga niraan cost. Work in process, debit. Finished goods inventory, debit. And then cost of goods sold, debit. Credit, overhead control. So, debit here because this is an under application. So, dudug nga niraan balances for each. Instead nga, usala. Unlike this part here, nga usala. Cost of goods sold laan gin-adjust. Here, because it is material,